The rain fell relentlessly that night, slashing against the windows of the Johnson household like nature itself was weeping over the fate about to unfold inside. The dimly lit sitting room smelled of incense and worry. Stella Johnson sat at the edge of the couch, her trembling hands clasped together, her knuckles white. She had always been the strong one, the one who comforted her mother when times were hard, the one who encouraged her younger brother Victor to chase dreams even when reality mocked them. But tonight, strength felt like a cruel joke. Across from her, Victor paced the floor, sweat beading on his forehead. Their mother sat quietly in the corner, eyes red and swollen, unable to look at her daughter. The doorbell rang. A deep, commanding chime that cut through the silence like a blade. Victor froze. Stella's heart slammed against her ribs. "They're here," he whispered. Before Stella could respond, the door opened. Not knocked. Opened. As if it were already theirs. Two men in dark suits entered, their presence suffocating the air. Their faces were stone, their movements precise. Behind them, a man followed, tall, sharp-featured, with a cold aura that seemed to drain the warmth from the room. His suit was tailored to perfection, black as midnight, his tie blood red. His gaze was sharp, unreadable, and when his eyes landed on Stella, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Kang Dae-hyun. The name itself was enough to silence whispers in the business world. A Korean CEO whose empire stretched across continents. To the public, he was ruthless, cunning, and dangerously ambitious. To those in the shadows, he was something darker, the head of a mafia network that traded in power, secrets, and blood. Victor swallowed hard. Mr. Kang, sir, Enough. Dae-hyun's voice was deep, smooth, yet laced with authority that crushed resistance before it was born. His accent carried traces of soul, polished with the international elegance of someone who commanded both boardrooms and battlefields. His eyes moved from Victor to Stella, lingering on her face. She met his gaze despite the tremor in her heart. Those eyes cold, calculating, yet filled with something unspoken. "This is her?" he asked flatly. Victor nodded, his lips trembling. "Why, yes. My sister, Stella." Silence fell. Stella felt as if the world was holding its breath. Dae-hyun stepped closer, and with each stride, Stella's chest tightened. He stopped before her, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. He studied her as though she were a piece of art he was about to purchase. "You'll do," he murmured finally. Stella's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" A flicker of amusement touched his lips, but his eyes remained hard. "You'll be my wife." The words landed like a dagger. Her mother gasped softly. Victor dropped his gaze to the floor. Stella rose to her feet, anger flaring through the fear. "I will not." For the first time, a faint smile curved Dae-hyun's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You misunderstand, Miss Johnson. This is not a request." Her pulse quickened. She glanced at Victor, whose trembling hands betrayed his guilt. "Victor, what have you done?" Victor's voice cracked. I had no choice, Stella. I owed them. You sold me," she whispered, her voice trembling between disbelief and fury. "I saved you," Victor choked out. "If I didn't agree, they would have killed me. They would have killed all of us." Tears stung Stella's eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of this stranger, this man who had just declared ownership over her life. She turned back to Dae-hyun, her voice sharp as steel. "I am not an object you can buy to pay off a debt." His eyes darkened, and in one swift movement, he reached forward, his fingers brushing her chin, tilting her face up toward his. The touch was cold yet commanding, a spark of dominance that made her shiver. "You think you have a choice?" he murmured, his voice low, dangerous. "Your brother's debt is not small. His life, your family's life, it all balances on a knife's edge. The only reason you're still breathing is because I have chosen you." Her breath caught in her throat. His grip loosened, and he stepped back, straightening his jacket as though nothing had happened. "The wedding will be tomorrow. Prepare yourself." He turned, gesturing for his men to follow. The room remained tense, the silence deafening as he walked toward the door. Before stepping out, he paused, his voice echoing like a final decree. "You belong to me now." And then he was gone. The door shut, leaving behind a room filled with despair. Stella's legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the couch, trembling. Her mother rushed to her side, sobbing, while Victor fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. But Stella's eyes were locked on the door, her heart pounding with anger and fear. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or curse fate itself. All she knew was that her life had been stolen from her, and tomorrow, she would be chained to a man who was feared across nations. Her hands trembled as she clutched the thin bedsheet. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. That cold, piercing stare. That ruthless tone. The way he had declared ownership over her, without hesitation. "Stella," her mother's voice came from the door, soft, broken. She entered slowly, her eyes swollen from crying all night. "The car is here." Stella lifted her gaze. "The car?" Her mother nodded. "He sent men to take you." A shiver ran through Stella's body. She rose slowly, straightening her shoulders, masking her fear with defiance. "Then let's not make him wait." The car waiting outside was sleek and black, an armored luxury vehicle that screamed both wealth and danger. Two men in dark suits stood by, their eyes hidden behind tinted glasses, their posture stiff with authority. Stella stepped inside, the leather seat swallowing her in silence. She stared out the tinted window as the car pulled away from her modest neighborhood and into the bustling city streets. Lagos was alive with honking cars, street vendors shouting, children running between narrow alleys. Yet Stella felt as though she were in another world altogether. Isolated, trapped. Her thoughts raced. Marriage? To a stranger? No, worse, to a mafia boss. How could she possibly survive this? But when the car slowed and turned into a long driveway lined with iron gates and armed guards, her breath caught. The mansion loomed before her like a fortress. Modern, sleek, and yet carrying an air of intimidation. Walls of glass and steel rose high, guarded by men who stood as if carved from stone. The Johnson house was humble, filled with warmth. This place was cold, sharp, merciless. The doors opened. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble driveway. Inside, the mansion was no less intimidating. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. Chandeliers glittered above, their crystals refracting cold light. Every corner seemed to whisper wealth, power, and secrecy. And there he was. Kang Dae-hyun stood at the end of the grand hall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his presence consuming the space around him. He looked at her with unreadable eyes, his hands tucked casually into his pockets, as if this moment was nothing more than a business transaction. "Stella," he said, her name rolling off his tongue with unsettling familiarity. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Kang." One of his brows arched. "You may call me Dae-hyun. You are, after all, to be my wife." Her lips tightened. A wife is chosen, not bought. Something flickered in his eyes, a glint of amusement, perhaps even admiration, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Strong words. I prefer that. Strength is far more interesting than compliance." He walked toward her, his steps deliberate, controlled. When he stood before her, Stella felt the air shift. His presence was magnetic, suffocating, drawing her in even as she wanted to recoil. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. Her voice was sharp. "Because my brother made a mistake, and you decided to punish me for it." His lips curved into the faintest of smirks. "Punishment? No, Stella. This is far more than that. You are an opportunity." She frowned. "An opportunity?" His gaze darkened. "A union between us strengthens my ties to Nigeria. Your family's name, though small, gives me local legitimacy. Your beauty ensures loyalty. And your spirit." His eyes lingered on her with a hunger that made her shiver. "Your spirit will make you unforgettable." Stella's heart raced, though she clenched her fists to steady herself. So, I'm just a tool in your empire? Another weapon in your arsenal? Exactly, he replied, unflinching. But unlike my guns and men, you may prove far more entertaining. Her cheeks flushed with anger. I will never be your entertainment. Dae-hyun stepped closer, so near she could feel the heat of his breath. We'll see. The wedding was small, private, yet suffocating. No friends, no joy, no laughter. Only contracts signed, vows spoken like business deals, and a kiss that felt more like a claim than affection. Stella stood in white, but it wasn't purity, it was surrender. Her heart rebelled with every word, but her tongue was trapped. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Dae-hyun's hand closed around hers like steel. Smile, he murmured against her ear, his lips grazing her skin. If you don't, they'll think you're weak. She turned to face the small gathering, his men, his advisors, his world. And though her heart burned with fury, she smiled. A beautiful, defiant smile that made her look like a queen standing beside her king. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the mansion grew quiet, Stella found herself alone in their grand bedroom. The room was lavish, velvet drapes, silk sheets, marble floors. Yet it felt more like a gilded cage. The door opened, and Dae-hyun entered. She stiffened, her back straight as she faced him. He removed his jacket slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. You hate me, he said simply. Her voice was low but firm. I don't know you enough to hate you, but I hate what you've done. He walked closer, loosening his tie. Good. Hate is better than indifference. Hate keeps the fire alive. Fire, she spat. There is no fire between us. A dark smile curved his lips as he stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the tension thrumming between them. His hand brushed her cheek, almost tender, almost cruel. There will be. Her breath caught. His touch lingered, then withdrew, leaving her burning with confusion, fear, anger, and something far more dangerous. Desire. She turned away quickly, clutching the bedpost, as though it could anchor her. You can own my name, Dae-hyun. You can own this marriage. But you will never own me. Behind her, he chuckled softly, a low, dangerous sound. We'll see, Stella. We'll see. The door shut behind him as he left her in silence. And for the first time since it all began, Stella realized the truth. This wasn't just a marriage. Behind locked doors, the silence of the Kong mansion was suffocating. Stella stood before the massive window in the bedroom she now shared with her husband. Beyond the glass, the city lights of Lagos shimmered like scattered stars, but none of their brilliance could pierce the darkness inside her chest. She was married, bound to a man who treated her like an acquisition, a pawn in his empire of power and shadows. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, a woman in a silk nightgown, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes burning with anger. She barely recognized herself. The door creaked open. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. The weight of his presence was unmistakable. Kong Dae-hyun stepped inside, his jacket already removed, his shirt undone at the collar. He looked more relaxed now, but no less dangerous. His every movement was deliberate, controlled, like a predator that never lost awareness of its prey. You haven't eaten, he said flatly, his gaze falling on the untouched dinner tray. Stella didn't move. I wasn't hungry. You'll need your strength, he replied, crossing the room toward her. This life is not forgiving to the weak. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then perhaps I don't belong here. His footsteps slowed. But you do, whether you like it or not. Finally, she turned to face him, her eyes sharp. You may have forced me into this marriage, but you can't force me to love you. For the first time, his expression shifted. Something unreadable flickered across his face, quickly masked again. I don't need your love, he said, voice low. I need your loyalty. And if I refuse? He stepped closer, until the space between them vanished. His hand lifted, brushing against her cheek, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. His touch was deceptively gentle, but the power behind it was undeniable. Then, he murmured, his lips dangerously close to hers, you'll find that disloyalty has a price you cannot afford. Her heart pounded, though she forced herself not to retreat. You think fear will bind me? You're wrong. You don't know me, Daehyun. A smirk tugged at his lips. On the contrary, I know exactly who you are. A woman of fire. A woman who can't be broken easily. That's why I chose you. She jerked her face away, stepping back.
No.
You chose me because my brother was desperate and you knew I had no choice. His eyes darkened, but instead of anger, a strange admiration gleamed within them. Perhaps. But you intrigue me, Stella. Most women would have submitted by now. You fight. Her breath caught, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of the moment. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that curled into her ear. And it makes me want you even more. The air between them ignited. Stella's pulse hammered wildly as his nearness threatened to consume her. Her mind screamed to push him away, but her body betrayed her. Heat pooling low, breath catching in her throat.
No.
She couldn't allow this. With a surge of defiance, she shoved him back. Stay away from me. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then he chuckled softly, a sound that both infuriated and unsettled her. Behind locked doors, Stella, he said, his gaze searing into hers, you can fight me all you want. But sooner or later, you'll realize something. Her voice trembled. And what's that? His smirk deepened, his eyes dark with desire. That hate and desire are not so different. One burns just as hot as the other. Her stomach twisted, her body betraying her resolve. She hated him. She despised everything he stood for. And yet, her pulse still raced at his words. Her skin still tingled where his hand had touched her. Good night, Mrs. Kong, he said finally, turning toward the door. He paused, glancing back at her one last time. Sleep well if you can. And then he was gone, leaving Stella trembling in the quiet, her chest heaving with unspoken turmoil. She sank to the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. This was madness. This man was her enemy. And yet, behind these locked doors, she could not deny the truth creeping into her heart. The cold king was dangerous, ruthless, but he had awakened something inside her she couldn't control. And that terrified her more than anything else. The days that followed were a blur of silence and fire. Stella moved through the Kong mansion like a ghost trapped in a gilded cage. Servants watched her with quiet curiosity, guards shadowed her every step, and Daehyun, her husband, her captor, was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Sometimes she would catch him watching her from across a room, his sharp gaze lingering too long before shifting away. Other times, he vanished into meetings, disappearing into the underworld of business and blood that she wanted no part of. Yet no matter how much she tried to steel herself against him, she could not forget that night. The closeness of his breath, the heat of his hand against her cheek, the words that had burned into her soul. Hate and desire are not so different. She told herself it was nonsense. She told herself she hated him, but her body betrayed her in ways she couldn't admit aloud. One evening, as the sky outside bled into twilight, Stella found herself in the mansion's library. The room was vast, its shelves stretching to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled faintly of old ink and dust. It was the first place in the house that gave her a sense of peace, a sanctuary of words, far removed from the chaos of her life. She was running her fingers along the spines of the books when his voice cut through the silence. You read? She froze. Slowly she turned. Daehyun leaned against the doorway, his tie loosened, his jacket gone, the first few buttons of his shirt undone. He looked almost casual, yet his presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Of course I read, she said, narrowing her eyes. Unlike you, perhaps, I find comfort in something other than power. He smirked faintly, stepping into the room. On the contrary, books are power. Knowledge sharpens the mind, and a sharp mind is far deadlier than any gun. She scoffed, turning back to the shelf. You speak of guns as if they're normal. They are, he replied simply, his footsteps slow as he approached. In my world, they are survival. His world, not hers. She pulled a book from the shelf, an old classic, and sat by the window, determined to ignore him. Yet when he crossed the room and sat across from her, his gaze burning into her, it became impossible. "Why are you here?" she demanded, flipping open the book. His eyes lingered on her, unreadable. "Because I want to be." Her pulse quickened. "You enjoy tormenting me, don't you?" "Torment." He chuckled softly, shaking his head.
No, Stella.
"I enjoy watching you fight me. You're different. Most women in your position would have bent by now."
You resist.
"Maybe that's because I don't belong to you," she snapped, lowering the book. His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "You belong to me more than you realize." Before she could retort, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locked on hers. The intensity of his gaze made her chest tighten. "Tell me something, Stella," he said, his voice low, intimate. "Do you hate me?" Her breath caught. The answer should have been easy.
Yes.
Yes, she hated him. But the words stuck in her throat. I hate what you've done to me," she whispered finally. His smirk deepened. "Not the same thing." Her cheeks flushed, anger and confusion swirling inside her. "You twist everything." "No," he leaned closer, so close she could feel his warmth, his scent, clean, sharp, intoxicating. "I only reveal what you're afraid to admit." The silence between them thickened, charged. She could hear her own heartbeat, wild and unsteady. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Then his hand moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out, brushing his fingers across hers where the book rested in her lap. The touch was featherlight, but it sent a shiver racing through her body. "Don't," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something far from certainty. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and unyielding. "Don't what?" "Touch you." Her breath quickened. "Yes." His thumb grazed the back of her hand, igniting sparks she desperately tried to ignore. "Then tell me to stop. Tell me, and I will." She opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. Her body betrayed her, leaning ever so slightly toward him. Her pulse pounded with fear and want, anger and need. Finally, she pulled her hand away, clutching the book like a shield. "Stop." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, he leaned back, withdrawing his touch. "As you wish," he said, his voice low but laced with satisfaction. Stella's chest heaved, her body trembling from the storm he had unleashed within her. She glared at him, but the fire in her eyes only seemed to amuse him further. "You can deny it all you want," he murmured, rising to his feet. "But the fire's there. And sooner or later, Stella, you'll stop fighting it." He left the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence, leaving her breathless and shaken. Clutching the book tightly, she closed her eyes, her heart hammering. He was right, and that terrified her. Because the most dangerous thing of all wasn't Daehyun's power or ruthlessness. It was the way her own heart betrayed her whenever he was near. Never slept. Even at night, Stella could hear footsteps echoing in the halls, the murmur of hushed voices, the subtle hum of danger vibrating through the air. She was learning, slowly, that being married to Kang Daehyun meant being married to shadows. Every evening he disappeared into his study, surrounded by men who spoke in low tones, their faces grim. Stella tried to avoid listening at first, but curiosity and fear drew her closer. One night, as the heavy doors of his office stood slightly ajar, she caught the words that made her blood run cold. "Park is moving against us," one of the men said. "Let him," Daehyun replied coolly. "He forgets that Lagos is mine now."
Park. She remembered the name.
Mina Park, Daehyun's rumored former lover, whispered about in half-truths. But this wasn't Mina. This was another Park. A rival. A danger. "Victor is the weak link," another voice added. "He owes more than he told you. If Park gets to him, then he'll wish he hadn't," Daehyun said, his tone dark as steel. Stella staggered back, her heart pounding. Victor again. Her brother's foolishness had dragged her into this nightmare, and now it seemed the nightmare was far from over. That night, she confronted Daehyun. She stormed into the bedroom, her eyes blazing. "You knew about Victor. About everything." He glanced up from removing his cufflinks, his expression calm. "Of course I knew." Her fists clenched. "And you still force me into this marriage? You still trap me here?" His gaze met hers, cold and unwavering. "Your brother's mistakes are not my concern. My concern is control. And you, Stella, are control." Tears of rage stung her eyes. "You think you own everything. Everyone. But one day, Daehyun, someone will come who you cannot control." He stepped closer, his presence suffocating, his hand lifting to brush her cheek almost tenderly. "Perhaps. But it won't be you." Her chest heaved, her anger colliding with the unwanted heat his touch always stirred in her. And then gunfire. Sharp, echoing, violent. Stella gasped, freezing as shouts erupted downstairs. Daehyun's expression hardened instantly. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the corner of the room. "Stay here. Do not move." "Wait. What's happening?" she cried, fear seizing her chest. "War," he said flatly, his voice like ice. "And you are mine to protect." Before she could respond, he was gone, his men flooding the halls as chaos thundered through the mansion. Stella pressed herself against the wall, trembling as screams and shots filled the night. She was trapped in his world now, this world of shadows and blood. And for the first time, she realized the truth. She could no longer escape. In the air when Stella finally dared to step out of hiding. Her bare feet patted against the cold marble floor as she followed the faint sounds of shouting and violence. And then she saw him. Daehyun stood in the grand hall, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with blood that wasn't his own. He moved like a predator, gun in hand, his expression calm and deadly as he fired with precision. Around him, his men fought fiercely against the intruders, Park's men, she realized with horror. One of the attackers broke through, lunging toward Stella. She screamed, stumbling back, only for a shot to ring out, the man collapsing at her feet. Daehyun stood across the room, his gun still smoking, his eyes locked on her. For the first time, Stella saw something in those eyes that made her chest ache. Not just ruthlessness, not just control, but fear. Fear of losing her. When the last of the intruders fell, silence returned. The marble floor was stained, the air heavy with smoke and blood. Daehyun strode toward her, his chest heaving. "I told you to stay hidden," he growled. She trembled, her tears finally falling. "I couldn't. I thought." Before she could finish, his hands closed around her face, pulling her close. And then his lips were on hers. The kiss was nothing like she imagined. It was fierce, consuming, desperate. A clash of fire and ice, hate and desire, fear and longing. She pushed against him at first, but her resistance melted as his arms wrapped around her, his body pressing against hers, grounding her in the storm. Her fingers clutched his shirt, her lips parting beneath his, surrendering to the fire she could no longer deny. When they finally broke apart, their breaths ragged, he rested his forehead against hers. "You are mine, Stella," he whispered, his voice raw. "Not because of a debt, not because of control, but because I cannot let you go." Her heart ached, her body trembling as she whispered back, "And what if I don't want to be yours?" His lips brushed hers again, softer this time. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making you want to be." The walls she had built crumbled. The anger, the hate, the fear, all of it burned away beneath the heat of the moment. She kissed him again, fiercely, hungrily, as though surrendering not just her body but her soul. That night, behind locked doors, they became fire and ice, clashing, melting, consuming each other in a storm of passion that neither could resist. When dawn broke, Stella lay tangled in silk sheets, Daehyun's arm draped over her, his breath warm against her neck. For the first time since it all began, she realized the truth. She was no longer just his prisoner. She was his equal, his weakness, his love. And together, they would face whatever shadows dared to come.